All right. The other big risk that we want to talk about is the question of indemnity. And your brother wrote this article on LinkedIn. And so why don't you set it up and we'll wrap up on your brother's article.
Yes. So, just for some context, my brother Leonard Park, he is both a lawyer, went to Santa Clara University, as well as he is a product manager. He has worked for a number of legal tech companies, including LexisNexis. And this is his thing. He uses AI to build legal tech products. And so he has been testing out every AI service that comes in, looks at their APIs, looks at their pricing, looks at the rate, the window sizes, the rates, all of these things to try to figure out, frankly, how to build better products for himself. And he's been looking at Perplexity because it is a fantastic consumer level product. It's been very useful from a search engine perspective. Google has openly talked about how worried they are about Perplexity. And this is part of why you see these crappy AI summaries on Google right now, because they are scared of what Perplexity is doing, quite frankly. But since my brother Leo is also a lawyer, he digs into things like terms and conditions, IP treatment, and he noticed that when Perplexity is providing these terms for users, both on a consumer and on an enterprise perspective, it is hard to actually either you're giving up a lot of your rights to your own data every time you use Perplexity, which seems to be kind of a problem if you care about running a governed enterprise or if you consider your organization to have intellectual property. So this is something to really be looking out for, because every company is going to do this a little bit differently. And frankly, I feel like a lot of the AI companies are still making up the rules as they go along. They might be covering their own butts a little bit too carefully, or they might not have a lot of experience building enterprise products. And so they are using poor language in their own terms and conditions, or just copying and pasting from bad places.
What I find so interesting about this article and really the entire angle that he sort of took with it is that despite us spending all this time talking about OpenAI and Anthropic going after the enterprise, I hadn't really considered this angle, meaning that every time we talk about that, it's mostly about how do you leverage these LLMs with your own data to provide information that, right? It's all data you own.
Mhm.
Perplexity's model obviously is to disrupt the search engines, and you can use, I mean, you can use OpenAI and you can use Claude to search the internet and do similar kind of things. But Perplexity, unique sort of amongst these, especially because they don't really have their own models, they use other models, um, is specifically trying to disrupt the search space. And
Mhm.
so, like, I didn't even know they had an enterprise offering. I'm still not entirely sure what you would do with this, but it was just the sort of really interesting examination. And I always appreciate when someone exposes something that I didn't think about, right? But if I'm a CIO and I have my employees using Perplexity, potentially, even if I don't have an enterprise fund, if they're just doing it on their own, right? I use Perplexity all the time, and I don't have an account. Like, I don't pay them any money. um, does that create risk for you? Does that put you as a CIO, your organization, in some form of risk? My gut says it doesn't, indemnity or indemnification or not, just because I don't see the New York Times deciding to go after Boeing because they have some users using Perplexity. But I could be wrong on that. I don't know. It was really interesting to, and what I think more than anything, the article that your brother wrote exposed for me was it's like all the rules are changing. Everything here, when you stick AI in the middle of it, and AI is consuming, sucking up all this data and spitting stuff out in whatever context, it's like everything changes. And so where my mind went is, well, wait a minute. So I'm going back to the legal context. If I happen to have access to LexisNexis in my environment for legal research, and I now bring in a tool and it gets access to that because I need it for some specific use case, am I violating a copyright there? Am I breaking a terms of and condition of that provider? And for that matter, does that hold true with any system of record or any kind of data source provider? It's like these are questions I hadn't really even considered. And so I think, for me, the big takeaway from your brother's article was like, because I have all this more work that, if I'm a CIO, I've got all this more work I better get to doing because I need to really start getting under the covers and figuring out where are my risks. And I think it's going to completely change the game around compliance and governance. It's a whole nother layer.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the rules have changed as much as that generative AI and search companies have been used to getting away by playing by their own rules. So for the Google search engine being the biggest example, they're used to being able to index the entire web without any consequences, basically, because we made some rules that said that they're allowed to break copyright, basically for the good of search.
Yeah, well, it was hard, right? It was always based on this. The defense was fair use, and
Mhm,
I feel like it was a fair argument. I mean, we talked about, like I said, I use Perplexity every day.
mhm,
Now, ironically enough, I use it through another interface, so I'm not even on the Perplexity site most of the time.
mhm.
But I use it to synthesize data, summarize, and give me a directional idea, and then I click through the links. I'm clicking through anyway, right? And so it is not subverting for me in my use model anyway. The ultimate sort of the same kind of process that traditional search engines would use, or in my opinion, the fair use approach of it. But it just like I said, it just what it really spoke to me is like what we have is more unknowns than knowns here, and
Right.
it's one more thing to figure out.
And I think it's not just the indemnity issue, but you mentioned that you use Perplexity through another service, and Perplexity is claiming to some extent that they could also be owners of that service as part of the flow through. And that is extremely uh, uh, that's difficult to work with, because obviously if you're using an API for your own application, you're not giving that API ownership of your application in any way, shape, or form. And so obviously there needs to be a little bit of balance put here as well. That AI companies want as much data as they can get, but does this mean they can have a license to every single bit of data and associated workflow that goes through any aspect of any API in any way, shape, or form? It's probably overreaching just a bit. So uh, something to look out for.
Well, it looks like you and your brother will have something to discuss over Thanksgiving.
Yeah, this is how our Thanksgiving dinners work, and then our the rest of our family is bored to tears.